Have you ever stood in a place where even the rusted rivets on the wall seem to whisper a forgotten past? I have. Inside the hollow shell of an abandoned power plant, where corrosion eats through thick steel doors and tangled cables hang like the dead veins of a long-extinct beast. The silence is overwhelming. The air itself seems to echo, carrying the ghost of every machine that once roared here. There are no workers, no lights, just a haunting stillness, so profound it chills you to the bone. And yet, this place, this decaying giant, was once the beating heart of Toronto. At its peak, it generated a tenth of all electricity used across Ontario. It powered neighborhoods, fed factories, and kept an entire city alive through its darkest winters. Now it stands like a corpse of industry, sealed off, crumbling, and deadly. So deadly, in fact, it claimed the life of a photographer who dared to capture its true scale. So what happened? What killed a monument that once held the city on its back? How does a titan of steel and fire fall into ruin, ignored, corroded, and declared a threat? And more importantly, if this was the fate of Hearn, how many more forgotten giants are waiting for the same end? If you've ever wondered about the black holes in history that no one wants to talk about, if you believe that the forgotten places still have stories to tell, then hit like, subscribe, turn on the bell, and follow me into the darkness of the Hearn generating station, Toronto's most dangerous relic, still standing in the shadows. At the dawn of the 20th century, Toronto was still a city finding its footing. Streetcars began to hum along the roads. Electric lights started creeping into modest homes. But there was a problem. The power system was fractured. Each company laid its own lines. No connection, no cooperation. It was a city that had electricity, but couldn't light itself. And then, Adam Beck emerged. A man ahead of his time. He believed electricity wasn't a luxury, it was a right. In 1906, he founded the Hydroelectric Power Commission of Ontario. A few years later, electricity from Niagara Falls surged into Toronto. For the first time, the entire city lit up, and Toronto awakened. But to keep that light alive, they needed something massive, a machine unlike anything built before. And so they chose a site, not for its beauty, but for its price. An old swamp, an industrial dumping ground on the Portlands. No one chose it for glory. They chose it because it was cheap, empty, and forgotten. They didn't build a plant, they raised a fortress. Steel foundations driven deep into the mud, shock-absorbing floors, a frame engineered never to fall. Inside it, over 130 million pounds of machinery, spinning day and night, turbines, steam, endless coal conveyors, a living organism powered by pressure and fire. But the most terrifying part wasn't the engineering, it was the mindset, built to run forever. No one planned for the end. And then, in 1951, they flipped the switch. The machine came to life, and no one knew when or how it would stop. Can you imagine standing inside a creature made of steel, flame, and an unrelenting roar? That's what it felt like to enter the Hearn generating station in the 1950s. Its turbine hall stretched nearly 1,000 feet, longer than 3 football fields. 12 massive turbines churned with superheated steam, their pounding rhythm like the heartbeat of a metallic beast. The air vibrated, the hiss of steel, the bass hum of electricity, the flicker of pale light reflecting off warped pipes. It didn't feel like a machine. It felt alive. And it wasn't just a plant, it was a creature. One kept in check, barely, by human hands. Behind those walls were the workers, not operators, companions to a beast. They didn't command it, they coaxed it. They adjusted pressure, balanced turbines, monitored every pipe and valve. One misstep, and you weren't just burnt, you were scarred. Ontario Hydro recorded countless injuries, broken bones, lifelong trauma. One engineer described the job like this: you didn't operate a machine, you tamed a wild animal. Still, hundreds stayed, because Hearn didn't just power the city, it powered lives. At its peak, over 600 people worked inside, families with 3 generations in the plant. Students came to intern, kids toured the halls. People called it a working-class school. To me, it felt like a city within a city, fueled by electricity, held up by sweat. But everything that runs at full capacity eventually pays a price. The higher the output, the greater the risk. And the ones closest to the fire always burn first. Hearn once produced 10% of Ontario's electricity. To do it, it burned over 400 tons of coal per hour, spewing smoke, sulfur, and ash. It stained the skies, it damaged lungs, and people started asking, was it worth it? Because like every living thing pushed beyond its limits, one day the machine began to crack. Did you know some entered Hearn and never came out? As Toronto glowed behind Hearn's steel doors, injuries piled up quietly. In the 60s and 70s, burns, falls, gas leaks, none of it made headlines. The power industry then had an accident rate 3 times higher than most jobs. And yet, no one remembered their names. Some died inside. A few years later, their sons took the same job, because there was no other option. Was it tradition or a trap? Even after it shut down, the tragedies continued. 2008, a young photographer fell while exploring inside. 2018, another died in a coal pit. Both entered out of curiosity. Neither returned. Maybe the most dangerous thing is when we forget how dangerous a place truly is. And so a question begins to form. Was progress ever worth it? If the cost was blood and silence from the nameless? Because sometimes the shadow a symbol leaves is far darker than the light it once gave off. You could see Hearn's glow across Toronto, but the soot it poured into the air, where did that go? Over 400 tons of coal an hour, 8 short smokestacks, fly ash, soot, sulfur. It settled on windows, trees, and maybe inside lungs. For years, almost no one spoke up. Maybe they thought they had no choice. Only when the smoke reached the downtown core did protests begin. It's a familiar contradiction. In the US, the Navajo generating station near the Grand Canyon faced public outrage, but only after decades of operation. Maybe the pollution stayed the same, but people's awareness didn't. In 1973, Hearn raised its smokestacks to 215 meters, installed filters. But by then, the doubts were everywhere. Had it been proposed today, it might never have been approved. Not every structure built in the past fits the world of the future. Would you believe Hearn stopped operating and no one even noticed? July 1983, the plant shut down. No announcement, no farewell, no gratitude. Workers left, shops nearby closed. It was as if someone quietly pulled the plug and walked away. For East End Toronto, Hearn wasn't just a job site, it was a foundation. Its shutdown meant more than darkness. It meant dislocation. Unemployment soared, young people left, one plant stopped, and an entire community staggered. But this wasn't just Hearn's story. Detroit lost its auto plants, Virginia lost its coal mines, and each place asked the same question: what comes after the symbol dies? That's the real fear. Not that it ends, but that no one plans for when it does. A machine that once powered a city now sits silent, wrapped in dust and rusted steel. But it didn't vanish. It changed roles. From power plant to urban explorer's shrine. Rust-streaked pipes, abandoned corridors, darkness where once there was unrelenting light. Every footstep sounds like it wakes something sleeping. There's something about places that once lived, even when all that's left is a shell. But not everyone who enters comes out. 2018, another photographer fell into the coal pit. He never made it home. Hearn was never built to be still. When it's quiet, it's lethal. So why do people still come? Maybe because the places we abandon often hold the truths the present wants to forget. And when the machines fall silent, Hearn begins to speak. In silence, steel, and memory. Even after its engines went silent, Hearn still stands, waiting for an answer. Demolish it? Restore it? Or preserve it as a monument to memory? Tearing it down would cost a fortune. Rebuilding it would demand vision and grit, but to erase it entirely, Would that mean erasing the memory of an entire generation? Some structures no longer need to function. They only need to be remembered. Across the world, cities have learned to breathe new life into their ruins. New York gave us the High Line. Seattle turned rust into renewal with Gasworks Park. They didn't deny their past. They chose to live with it. So what about Hearn? What could it become if we chose to listen? Perhaps the real lesson isn't buried in the past, but in how we prepare for the moment everything stops. Every city is built for today, but it's remembered for how it faces tomorrow. If this journey made you stop and think, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.